Hi, I'm Jenny.
And I'm Mom.
And today we're back to do another video. So, as you can see, I'm here with my mom today, and today we're going to be discussing the Book of Longings by Soo Kid, which we've both read recently and really enjoyed. I read this back in June, so I talked about it a bit in my June wrap-up, which I'll put a link to up in the cards above. But in that wrap-up, I did say that I wanted to do a full review of this one, and then since my mom was also going to be reading it, I thought it would be really fun for us to talk about it together. So it's gonna be a little book club. I came up with some questions. So first, to start off with kind of a synopsis of the Book of Longings. The Book of Longings is a historical fiction novel written by Soo Kid, who is best known probably for The Secret Life of Bees, which was one of her earlier works. But this is her most recent release that came out earlier this year, and it is a retelling of the story of Jesus from his wife Anna's perspective. So in this story, we follow Anna, who marries Jesus as she engages in a number of different activities. What else do you think is really pertinent to the basic synopsis of this book? I mean, it's really just about her life.
It's a chronological account of her life. Mm-hmm. A large part of which included Jesus, but not all of it.
Not all of it, for sure.
So we get the story of him along with her story.
As well as an account of the time period.
Yeah, it's very much imbued with the time period and the norms at the time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's quite historically accurate.
Yeah. So that's kind of a basic synopsis of the book. We'll obviously get into a bit more of kind of specifics about the book through the questions. And then towards the end, we have a couple spoilery questions. So if you haven't read the book, I'll let you know when the spoiler questions begin. But if you have, I'd love for you to join us in this discussion down in the comment section below.
Although, to be fair, there's not that much surprise.
That's true. If you are someone who lives in the modern Western world, what happens in this story is probably not a surprise to you. That is a good point. But some of Anna's story is obviously surprising. Right. But the story related to Jesus, obviously, is not that surprising. So let's just get into the questions.
Okay.
So question number 1 is, what did you think of the book overall? So, Mom, you want to go first?
I loved it. Mm-hmm. I gave it 5 stars, which I do not ordinarily do. It takes a lot to get me to rate a book 5 stars. I actually read it almost twice. Mm-hmm. I read it back maybe a month and a half ago. Mm-hmm. I can't remember exactly when. Mm-hmm. Loved it then. And then in preparation for doing this, I started to reread it and really couldn't put it down again, even though I knew what was going to happen next. Mm-hmm. So it's that good. I just loved it.
Yeah, I loved it too. I also gave it 5 stars, as I talked about a little bit in my June wrap-up. As you'll kind of see in the later questions, I just thought every aspect of the story, from the character development to the thematic explorations to the historical authenticity, were all just so well done and well thought out. Like, you can really tell the amount of research both into the historical time period, but also theological research and like internal reflection by Soo Kid that went into this book. So I absolutely loved it as well. 5 out of 5 stars. So question number 2 is, between the setting, character, and themes, what do you think was most impressive?
And that's a hard question because the characters were, I thought, very well drawn. Minor characters, could have used a little more fleshing out maybe, but the major characters were very well drawn. The themes were obviously very important and well done. I am really loving this setting. Mm-hmm. I felt immersed in the world she was describing, as varied as it was. Because I hope this isn't a spoiler that some of it takes place in Alexandria. Yeah. So the various parts in what is now Israel were well drawn. The main city where Anna grows up, and then the more sort of rural area around Nazareth, and then Alexandria being the big metropolis. I just thought those were really well depicted, and I felt like I was there. Yeah. So I think that was the best part for me.
Yeah, I think I grappled too with this question, and I think I would have to agree that the setting is the best, which kind of relates to something we've talked about previously to even coming up with this idea of doing this video together, of this particularly given the mythology that surrounds Jesus and the time of Jesus. This part of world history is often such a hard one to actually picture it being real, because Jesus doesn't quite feel like a real
It's mythologized,
person.
yeah.
And so to see the kind of daily tasks, like Anna and her sisters-in-law have to like milk the goats
Right.
and sell
Draw
stuff
the
at the
water.
market, that like really Sumant Kid put so much attention into the kind of setting details that I think really helped to create this image of what life was actually really like for people who lived during this time.
The clothing. I mean,
The clothing.
The clothing. Could just picture it exactly, and very vivid and very authentic. I know that's the next question, but you know, there was so much research done into how people actually would have dressed,
Yeah.
what the people of means would wear, as opposed to the people who were the peasants. It was just really well done in that regard.
Yeah. And she has these beautifully drawn, so they have these great maps as well at the beginning that are so beautifully illustrated as well, that also help, I
Very
think, too.
useful. I refer to them a lot.
Yeah, especially since so many of the places that exist in this world are no longer called that same name now, or they no longer exist in many cases, or they're areas that are much different than obviously they were at this time. I think that was a really helpful aspect of the kind of setting creation as well.
The other thing that blew my mind and made the maps very helpful was the reality that the peasant tree walked everywhere.
Yeah, I was noticing that too.
They refer to
walk-
something as, it's only a day's walk.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like-
they're walking like 8 miles a day regularly, and you're like,
Right.
wow. So unfortunate.
That was just how they got around.
Yeah.
They thought nothing of taking a 3-day journey somewhere.
Yeah.
Because that was the only way you could get where you were going.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
It is pretty amazing.
But the map gave some perspective, I thought, in terms
Absolutely.
of where things were
Where
in
things
relation
actually
to other places they might be.
Yeah. So, leading us right into question number 3, which is, what are your thoughts on the setting in terms of the authenticity? And this one, so before either of us read this book, we went to a virtual book talk put on by the Atlanta History Center, which mythologized in our own family's life in a number of different ways that involved money exchanging hands prior to COVID-19 that was never returned. But anyway, we're not going to get into that today. But Sue Monk Kidd was talking with, is she on NPR or is she on PBS? Virginia Prescott.
It's GPB.
GPB. Someone
Which
from
is our local
PBS,
one of our local PBS radio stations.
There was Virginia Prescott, who we've actually been to a couple of book talks with her, and she's a very good moderator of like virtual book talks, but I'm sure in person once as well she'd be good at.
Yeah.
But she and Sue Monk Kidd talked a lot about Sue Monk Kidd's research into the setting and the time period, and I think she began researching this in like 2012 or something. It's been a long time that she started doing her historical research. So that goes to show that obviously the authenticity piece in my mind is very much present, because it's very much based on a lot of historical scholarly texts about the time period.
Right.
Do you have anything else to add about the authenticity?
Not really. I think that's right. It fleshes out what the setting was like in a way that isn't always as apparent in the actual biblical verses. So I think it was very helpful in that regard, to just getting a sense of the places where this happened.
So moving along to question number 4 is, what did you think of Anna as a main character, and also of Jesus, who also is a main character in different ways, although he's not physically present for a fair amount of the story.
A lot of the book.
So what did you think of
Anna? Anna was a really fascinating character. Very individual spirit, strong personality, really held hostage in many ways to the time in which she was born and constantly rebelling against that in whatever way she could. I liked how strong she was. She wasn't flawless, though. I mean, she was at times selfish and demanding, but I thought she was a really interesting character. I mean, I wanted to learn more about her.
Yeah.
I wanted to keep reading her story.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for me, her kind of headstrong personality very much comes through in this novel, and the lengths she goes to live the life she wants to live in a time that women were so constricted to the standards of what they should be doing. But I think also I was really struck by her curiosity about life and about what kind of there is more to life, that I think her and Jesus in that way were very much kindred spirits in this kind of interest in life and getting the best life possible. But also I think her bravery, and that kind of returns back to her headstrongness and her perseverance in terms of just in obviously times of great strife in her life, of which, being married to Jesus obviously would bring you some times of great strife. She's able to push through those feelings.
Those weren't the only times of strife.
No, she had a lot of times of strife.
She had a really rough time in many ways throughout her life, and she pushed through. That's a good way of putting it. And she was brave, and I saw you written curious. She was very curious. She did everything she could to break out of the cage. I mean, that's a term that's used in this story. As much as she could.
Yeah. And I think, too, the second part of the question related to Jesus, which we'll talk a bit more in the quote-unquote spoilery parts of the discussion, I also found a lot of those similar descriptors that we've been using for Anna to be true of Jesus. Like, I found him to be also a very flawed character in this story. He's obviously also very headstrong, very compassionate, but he is also so self-directed to the point of, or so selfless almost to the point that others who are close to him are also kind of suffering from his selflessness, which I think is explored quite a lot in the novel, of the kind of selflessness to the extreme and the detriment of that to others, I think.
He was depicted in this as a very gentle soul.
He was.
I think probably was true, but not exclusively.
Yeah.
There are excerpts in the Bible where he is angry. You didn't see a lot of anger in this story, the part of his life that we saw.
And he is attributed with some more 21st century ideals, especially given the freedom that he allows Anna, which obviously that was part of what Suma Kid wanted to explore, but does potentially question like the historical authenticity of that. Obviously there have been throughout history husbands and partners that have appreciated and thought of their female spouse's intellect as equal to theirs, but that historically is not necessarily commonplace. Which you do see in this book, that Jesus definitely considers Anna to be his equal.
No, that's a good point. I haven't really thought about that part as much as to whether that was really realistic, because it obviously was a very patriarchal society, and he really bent over backwards to just let her be herself, and that may not have been that realistic given the time period of the story.
Okay, but more on Jesus later. So question number 5 is, what did you think of Yalta? Now, for those who have not read the novel, Yalta is Anna's aunt, who is...
Oh, she's a widow.
You're right, I forgot.
She was a widow who had
forgot.
a tragic backstory.
Yeah, she was a widow. So what purpose do you think Yalta served in the story?
I've thought about that question a lot, too. I think Yalta, in a weird way, again, given the context of her life as we come to know her, she represented the freedom that Anna was striving for. She had basically escaped from a horrific situation, to a point, and I don't think this is a spoiler necessarily, it happens pretty early in the story, that she was married to a horribly abusive man, and when he died, she was accused of having poisoned him or somehow otherwise caused his death. And to escape those charges, it was arranged for her to have to leave her home and have a really life-altering decision made on her behalf, and be then under the thumb of one man or another for the rest of her life. And yet, through it all, her spirit was such that she really was, this sounds trite, but she was like the wind beneath Anna's wings. She helped Anna realize that she too could be free. It wasn't going to be easy, but if you just stuck at it and kept your head up, you too could be free. So I thought in many ways that's what she represented, was the spirit of freedom.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And this thought just popped into my head, so I haven't fully explored it. But I do know with The Secret Life of Bees, Sue Monk Kidd obviously has a great interest in like Mary and the like kind of feminine aspects of God, and I'm wondering if Yalta also, because of her association with the priestesses in Alexandria, Alexandria is also meant to kind of signify some of that kind of more feminine aspects of the holy realm. But as I said, that thought just popped into my head, so I don't know.
I mean, one of the overarching themes, and now that you're bringing up Secret Life of Bees, it's apparent to me also that is an important theme for Sue Monk Kidd, is the strength of women and empowering women, and women dealing with incredible adversity brought on by men. And persevering. Persisting, as they say. And her books, those two at least, are very women-centric. And in both stories, they're just dealing with horrible, abusive, controlling men. And they survive. And prevail, ultimately.
Which is also interesting because both stories also feature heavily women who in part find the ability to become free and thrive outside of the confines of their abusive families in Christianity, which we'll talk about more, the relationship between gender and Christianity a bit, because it's something Sue Monk Kidd talks about in her author's note. But I think that's an important theme too, of the kind of unique ways that women, particularly cis women, as are all the women in these books, relate to Christianity, I think is something that Sue Monk Kidd is very fascinated with. Okay, so now getting into kind of the more spoilery thematic questions. Spoilery. Question number 6 is, what do you think Sue Monk Kidd meant by longings? What role do Anna's longings play during the novel? What do you have to say about the longings?
The longings. Well, I mean, one of her biggest longing was to be free. The other longing she expresses is to have a voice and to have that voice heard. I think it works out fairly ingeniously that ultimately her voice is going to be heard. But she's struggling to have that happen, the whole story. So, I think she was just longing to have some significance.
And I think also using the word longing specifically, because to me longings imply something that you almost have resigned yourself to it not actually happening. But I think longings here is, through her perseverance and headstrong personality traits, she is actually able to achieve these like longings that as a child she wants to achieve, and as a young person earlier in the novel, but she doesn't actually see them ever fully coming to fruition. But by the end of the novel, I would say she has achieved her longings.
Yeah, she suffered a lot of loss along the way, but I think she finally does get there.
Yeah. Okay, question number 7. We return back to Jesus. So we already discussed Jesus a little bit, but the question is, what did you think of the portrayal of Jesus? Specifically, do you think he enhanced in this novel, he enhanced or altered your previous perceptions or perspectives on him?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question too, and one I had to think about a little bit. I have never really felt like I had a good, and I don't want to say this in the wrong way, it's not that I didn't have a good impression of him. I didn't really have much of an impression of him. He's just this, this embodiment. He's sort of too good to be true. He can't possibly have been a real man.
Yeah.
There's no one who could have been him. And this book really helped me get my head around the idea that yes, he was an actual man. He did inspire faith in people because he was a man of faith himself. He had a charisma, a quiet charisma. He was almost, and it is depicted in the story, and I'm not enough of a biblical scholar to know if that's accurate or not, but he seemed almost like a reluctant spiritual leader.
Yeah,
I
would say that's true.
He was propelled into that role, particularly after John the Mercer, as he's called in this story. John the Baptist was murdered, and he took up the cause. But his evolution into that role was gradual and difficult. And he, I thought it was interesting talking about when he was little and he was vilified very much because there was all this suspicion around his birth. Like, did he have who was his real father? How did this happen? No discussion at all about that having been a divine act at the time. I mean, there was nothing about the 3 kings or the star in the east, none of that. It's just he was born and it seemed a little sketchy to people. So he was ostracized as a child. His father, Joseph, stood up for him, but he had a rough childhood as a result. So maybe that made him more sensitive to other people who were suffering, but he didn't walk around with a halo on his head the way we're often led to believe he did his whole life, that he was somehow divine in his presence everywhere he went. So I really appreciated having a depiction of him as an actual man with actual feelings and actual doubts, and an abiding compassion and faith in people. Faith, not even in the biblical sense, but just like a faith that there's good in people. So I thought that was very well done. I mean, it wasn't overdone though. I mean, he wasn't a saint by any means. I mean, he really didn't really want any of this to have happened to him.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all of that. And I think it definitely did, similarly with the setting aspect, I think it did help me to situate him in history as a real person. And I think that his humanity and his human aspects in this book, because I agree completely, like there's no indication as this book is written that Jesus has any idea of, I feel like sometimes in traditional Christian theology it's said that like Jesus was walking around like knowing he was the Son of God, and that is not that's not something Suma Kid is saying. She's instead saying this was a human person that had a lot of compassion for others and saw injustice in his world and wanted to change it. But that was filled with a lot of doubt and confusion as well, that I think also made him much more real, but also relatable.
Yeah. No, I think, it wasn't overdone at all.
No.
The the saintliness. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a really important way to make him a more believable character.
But yeah, I think for me, what enhanced his character the most was the emphasis on his doubts about the kind of greater purpose of life, but his reassurance that, like, being a good person is the most important aspect of life. Okay, and then our final question, question number 8, is much of the book's focus, in my mind, was on how integral themes of social justice and fighting against and resisting oppression were in these earliest creations of Christianity, because that, obviously, if you're familiar with the biblical story, but also in this novel, there's a lot of abuse of power by the Roman rulers in the region of Judea that is quite oppressive to the Jewish community, and Jesus is very much part of the, like, political resistance and activism kind of surrounding taking down that abuse. So that obviously is something that Sue Kid really wanted to emphasize in this novel.
But she also, I mean, there was that type of oppression, but I think she really wanted to highlight as well the pervasive theme throughout all of history and continuing today of men's oppression of women. I mean, it was so stark in so many different side stories, just how horrific men behave towards women, horrifically men behave towards women, and how that's normalized.
Yeah.
That kind of behavior is normalized. I just found myself getting so aggravated every time Anna wanted to go somewhere. She had to have a man with her. Because if she didn't have a man with her, then some other man would hurt her. And it was just like, this, you know, does no one see what's wrong with this picture? Why is it women have to live in such terror all the time from men? Men will be men. I mean, when Tabitha gets raped, Anna's own mother says, you know, men will be men, as if that makes it okay. And Tabitha is the one who's very severely punished for crying out about what happened to her. So I think there's that oppression that Sue Monk Kidd wanted to highlight.
Yeah.
And again, I'm glad you brought up Secret Life of Bees, because that's just bringing that all back to me.
But there's also, I think, as Sue Monk Kidd mentions in the author's note, there is a creation, and so I think in part having this be Jesus' wife's perspective, there's such a mythology, particularly surrounding Jesus's singledom and the fact that he's an unmarried man, that she talks about in the author's note as in part relating to the ways that now Christianity understands and puts forth ideas of marriage as, like, this very sacred thing, and the importance of virginity for women, all of the aspects that are very oppressive to women of Christianity in large part come from, which Sue Monk Kidd says, like, a couple centuries after Jesus' actual death, the kind of erasure of any indication that he was married, in fact, specifically saying that he was a single person. And so the kind of original oppression of women by just taking out the very strong likelihood that Jesus had a wife from the story of the Bible is kind of the initial way in which women through Christianity have been oppressed.
I think that's right. I thought it was very poignant in a way. I mean, he really wanted to have a family.
Yeah.
And Anna didn't. At first I thought she was being really selfish about that. And it was explained that she didn't want to have children because she felt like she had a greater purpose. But I think in a way she also, on some level, believed that he had a greater purpose. And that tying him down with children would interfere with what his destiny was. But I don't think, and I mean, I don't think at the time it happened, I don't think it was realistic that he didn't have a relationship with a woman. But as you're saying, it was centuries later when this became sort of the convenient way to keep that patriarchal idea going.
When it also relates, interestingly, as Human Kid says, as Christianity absorbed ideas of asceticism and Greek dualism, which devalued the body and the physicality of the world in favor of the spirit. So it's interesting, too, to see also just the ways in which Christianity changes and absorbs other ideas as well. And this
which is
an indication.
It's sort of interesting, too, to make understanding of him that he was some sort of spiritual being that was, that separated him from mere mortals. When, to me at least, the reason he attracted such a following was his humanity. It was the idea that he would stop and help someone on the road when they needed help. He would give away money that he couldn't afford to give away to help somebody. And just this compassion. There's even a reference to that he says compassion over holiness.
Yeah.
That's what was important, and that's what made him the leader of these people. That's why people adored him. And yet over the centuries it's been transformed into him somehow being, not a regular human. Which is odd to me.
It is odd. And there is actually one, to kind of close it out, I have one greater question that I think kind of ties into this in terms of, I do kind of see in Christianity this divide between Christianity as a form of resistance and social justice, but also Christianity as a form of oppression. And we've seen that throughout history of what comes to mind at this moment is like the civil rights movement was to predominantly Christian bodies, and this may be because I'm reading this biography of John Lewis right now, but these two, deeply rooted in like theology, Christian groups of people, i.e. like white supremacists in the South and black theologians like Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and all the other Christian theologians of the civil rights movement using Christianity in these two very different ways. So I'm curious if you have any kind of thoughts on that, of just the way in which Christianity, the same text, can be used to further these, what I would say are two opposite.
Yeah, well, that's certainly been
ideas.
The story of Christianity through the ages. I mean, the Crusades and the Inquisition and the way that Christianity was used as a battering ram and a tool of oppression, contrasted with the view of Christianity of some of the other sects of Protestantism that are even to the extreme of asceticism, of just, trying to get back to the roots.
Yeah.
And
well, really, every break-off of Christianity is basically like, you know what? We actually are supposed to be good people.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Jesus was an immigrant. Jesus was a dark-skinned person. Jesus was a Jew. There's all these messages that are an effort to bring that reality back into the story. But I forget what we were talking about.
Just the two big...
The dichotomy.
Of social justice and resistance versus oppression. And just, I'm very fascinated by the way that this one text can be read in those two different ways of, like, every person should be treated equally, but also we're better white men are the only people that are worth valuing in any way.
We have to tell you how to live your life.
It's just very interesting.
In the name of God.
Yeah. But I would say that Suman Kid definitely is for that Christianity is a way to resist oppression and to be free of it.
Right. One other comment I wanted to make, and this is more of a stylistic comment, I think. I thought it was ingenious of her to weave in the stories we know from the Bible, and have the characters we've gotten to know sort of, experiencing.
Yeah.
I mean, Anna herself is almost stoned to death, so she's the one who he stops with. He's who is without sin cast the first stone, and the story of the Good Samaritan, and it's Tabitha. You know? So I just thought that was very cool. That these were familiar stories, and suddenly they weren't strangers.
Yeah.
That they were happening to. They were people we've gotten to know and love. So I thought that was a very clever device.
Well, in the way there also, we didn't even talk about this, but Judas is Anna's stepbrother, and so like she really personalized and humanized not only Jesus but every character quote unquote from the Bible. There are characters, I guess, from the Bible around that are alive during Jesus's time, appear in the story in some capacity, even if it's just like a follower of Jesus, like
the fishermen.
And Mary Magdalene,
Peter and Simon, and James, one of his brothers, becomes one of the disciples. Yeah, I thought the story of Judas, that really put him in a perspective that I hadn't seen before. That he set things in motion thinking he was doing the right thing, and he realized too late he wasn't. Yeah, and it was so sad.
Yeah,
but he came to it from what he thought was a good place.
Yeah. The kind of...
That he wasn't just a traitor.
Yeah, he wanted to kind of martyr Jesus before fully realizing that would mean that his sister's husband would die. So that was...
Well, and it also wasn't going to accomplish...
It wasn't going to accomplish anything.
What he had hoped it would.
Yeah, definitely.
Which he realized too late.
Yeah. But I think those are all our thoughts.
And we hope we haven't spoiled the book too much for those of you who haven't read it.
Oh, yeah.
But if you haven't, read it immediately.
Yes, definitely read it as soon as possible. Even if, I would say both, if you're completely non-religious, I think you would find this still to be a really engaging story. But also, I've seen many people on the internet who are very devout Christians who are like, I don't want to read this. I think this would provide you with a lot of interesting theological questions and potentially a path to like a deeper understanding of your own faith, which I would say it did for me.
I think that's right. I think it did for me also. And I'm a firm believer in reading things you don't think you're going to want to read.
Yeah.
Before you decide.
Yeah.
That you don't
like
agree
this
with
is
them.
not the what's the movie that
The Last Temptation of
Christ.
Christ.
This is not The Last Temptation of Christ.
No.
This is actually, I mean, like Suma Kid herself is a devout Christian, and this is her.
This is not at all disrespectful.
No.
Of the story, and it's not perverting.
No.
The idea of who Jesus was in any way.
Yeah. In my mind, it really, I mean, as we already said, it really reinforced and enhanced my views of him.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is our discussion. Thank you so much, Mom, for joining
for inviting me.
And thank you to my little sister Anne for setting up our tech. That is
a family affair.
It's a whole family affair. As we've said, if you have read the book and you want to talk to us down in the comment section below, we'd love to see your comment. Additionally, if you've not read the book and are now excited to, let us know. Also, if you found my channel through this video, hi, my name's Jenny. I make bookish content here on YouTube, and I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe, and I think that is everything. So I will talk to you next time.